In this video, I'm going to be making some coloured pottery clay like this. I'm going to be making it using some ceramic stains like these, and I'm going to be using 3 different techniques for the 3 different colours so that you can experiment and find out which method you prefer. If you like this video, do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and then you'll get a notification when I upload a new video. Thanks for watching. First of all, I put a respirator on. It's always a good idea to wear a respirator when you're handling ceramic stains. Then I weigh out the amount of stain that I need to use. I'm going to be using 2 pounds of clay, and I want the stain to be at a concentration of 8%, so I weigh out 8% of 2 pounds, which is 2.56 ounces. In fact, it's a little bit fiddly to get exactly 2.56 ounces, and I think I ended up with 2.57, around that, but that's fine. It's absolutely marginal. The difference is marginal. It's not going to make very much difference to the colour of the clay at all. As I say, I weighed out 2 pounds of clay, and I pat it into the shape that you can see there, so large flat shape, and slice it into thin slices. The reason I make it into that shape is that I want the surface area of the clay to be as large as it can be, so that, because I'm going to spread the stain out over the surface of the clay, and you need, because there's quite a lot of dry powder there, you do need quite a large surface area to spread it out, spread the stain out quite thinly. So I'm putting on some gloves there. You don't have to wear gloves if you don't want to, I just prefer to because it's very messy at the beginning. Spray the piece of clay with some water, make it quite damp because the stain is very dry and you're adding a lot of dry material to the clay, and if you don't make the clay wet, it's going to be very hard to wedge the stain in. And then spray again, once the stain is on, you spray the stain with some water to make it damp, just makes the whole mixing in process a lot easier. And then you stack the slices of clay on top of each other, sandwiching the stain in between the slabs of clay. And the last piece of clay I left clear, and it creates a sort of a clear seal on top of the little pile of clay. Press it together with your hands as firmly as you can, sort of squeeze it together a bit like you're squeezing a sandwich. And really what you're doing now is you're going to try and mix all of that dry stain into the clay. And what you'll see is that although I added quite a bit of water, it does get quite dry. Look, you can see there's still quite a lot of dry powder in there. And actually with this clay, I left it overnight wrapped in a damp cloth just to make sure that the clay itself was quite nice and wet. And still it's pretty dry. So just be aware that your clay will look like this when you're mixing the stain in, and not to panic. It will mix in eventually. You just need to do a lot of well, initially it's not really wedging. Initially it's just sort of squelching it around and trying to mix it in like you're trying to mix flour into dough. I added a bit of extra water there because it was feeling quite dry, but as you can see, even now it's beginning to blend in a bit better. It's not looking as dry and crumbly, and at a certain point you can take your gloves off because the mess will be minimal, and at this point it's dry enough that you can wedge it. It's still pretty streaky, as you can see, so you just need to keep wedging it, checking it, and then wedging it as you go along. And it does take a lot of wedging to mix it all in, so I've speeded it all up. And good idea to clean your surface down quite regularly to get rid of crusty bits of clay and dried stain, and then just keep wedging. And then periodically slice through the clay and check how it's doing, seeing how mixed in it is. You can see there's still a few little speckles there of dark stain, and it's good to get rid of as many of those little speckles as you can, because otherwise when it's fired they will show up as being very dark little patches in your clay. So there you go, that is method number 1. It's looking pretty even coloured there. Method number 2. Again, put your respirator on before you start handling the stain. Weigh out the quantity of stain, and again I'm using 2 pounds of clay, so I'm weighing out 2.56 ounces of stain. Transfer the stain, the powdered stain, into a plastic bag. Add a little bit of water to the plastic bag. You don't need very much. I would say maybe an egg cupful. It's best to use a small amount to start off with. What you're trying to do is you're trying to make the stain into a paste, and then transfer that into the clay. If you add a lot of water, you're going to be adding an enormous amount of water to your clay, which is going to make it really difficult to mix in and eventually wedge. So keep it a small amount of water. You'll probably find that it feels very dry for quite a long time, and then all of a sudden it'll become very liquid. So then you get your piece of clay, and you, a bit like making a pinch pot, you make a little dip in the centre of the clay. You're going to put the stain into that dip. Then, using a pair of scissors, just snip a small hole in the bag and let the stain drain into the dip in the clay. And then, with a pair of rubber gloves on, you can start trying to work the stain into the clay. You can see there that I'm trying to keep as much of the stain liquid in the clay as I can, but it will spill out, there's no way around it. One thing that I have seen people doing is actually mixing the stain and the clay together in a bowl. You can do that if you like. I don't find it necessary, and in fact I find the bowl a bit annoying because it ends up banging around. And actually, although it's a bit messy, it does, eventually the stain will be blended into the clay, and you can just wipe the surface down. It's not that big a deal. So lots of mess, as you can see. And the gloves are a bit of a pain to work with, but at the start when it's very messy, they're probably a good idea. So then when it's more or less mixed in, you can take the gloves off and start beginning to wedge it. I mean, you can see there it's too soft really to wedge, but it will get, there you go, it's sort of coming together there. And I'm just moving it around, trying to pick up as much of that stain as I can. Eventually, it's a good idea to actually just clean the board down, because you will find that you'll get little pieces of dried stain sticking in the wedged clay. There you go, it's good to wipe it down, because if the dried stain gets stuck in there, then it sort of defeats the purpose of all the blending that you're doing. So just keep wedging until the colour is even, and slice it open and check. It's looking pretty even there. There's a couple of tiny air bubbles in there, but the colour is fine. So that is method number 2. So here's the third method. First of all, you get some clay slip. I weighed out, it's about a pound of clay slip there, which you transfer into a clear plastic bag. And then put your respirator on, weigh out your stain, and then transfer the stain into the bag of slip. And then just massage the bag of slip so that the stain mixes in with the clay slip. In terms of weights, because there's a lot of water in the slip, you can't really be as precise with the weights as you are able to be with clay. But nevertheless, I used the same quantity of stain for this method as I did with the previous method, just to be consistent. So then when the stain looks like it's all mixed in, I got a pound of bone dry clay of the same clay body, and then put it into the bag of slip, as you can see. And then once it's all in, you sort of squeeze the clay, the slip bag, so that you can feel the liquid slip is going all the way around the bone dry clay, and it's completely immersed. Give it a bit of a jiggle just to make sure that the clay is covered in the slip. And then the idea is that you leave that overnight and the bone dry clay will absorb the coloured slip. So I put it in a container and then just put it to one side overnight. And then the next day you will see that all of that bone dry clay has absorbed the coloured slip and the mixture is relatively firm. It's still pretty gooey, so it would definitely not be easy to wedge that, but I weighed out a pound of the mixture and then I added it to a pound of clay, and really with my gloves on just mixed the coloured clay into the uncoloured clay, really just to sort of dry the mixture out a bit. It's really messy, as you can see, and it looks a bit alarming, but actually it's surprising how quickly that will turn into something that you can wedge. You just need to keep working it and mixing the stain in. So yeah, by this point, I think that probably took about 5 minutes to do. By this point it's got to a sort of a consistency where you can start wedging it a bit, and I just move it around the wedging surface to a dry part of the wedging surface just to get rid of as much of that excess moisture as I can. So really you just keep wedging it on the drier parts of the board until it feels like it's a firmer consistency, and then I put it in a plastic bag and keep it overnight and then use it the next day. So there you go, that's method number 3. Thanks for watching.